Imagine looking up at London's glittering skyline and feeling a chill because the towers you admire might be owned by nothing you can point to. That invisible hand is a ghost company, a shell that lives on paper but never steps into a boardroom, and it controls some of the most valuable real estate in the city. In the next few minutes, I'm going to pull back the curtain on this hidden network, show you how it's built, who pulls the strings, and why it matters to anyone who lives, works, or dreams of owning a piece of London. If this is blowing your mind, hit that subscribe button and let's keep exploring together. First, let's get crystal clear on what a ghost company actually is. In legal terms, it's a corporation that exists solely as a legal entity. It has a registered address, a company number, and a name, but it has no employees, no real operations, and often no assets of its own. Think of it as an empty suit of armor that can be slipped on and off at will. The purpose of that empty suit is to hide the true owner, the beneficial shareholder, behind layers of anonymity. In London, these shells are used to own luxury apartments, office blocks, historic pubs, and even whole streets, all while the public record shows only a nondescript limited company. Why does this matter? Because when a property is owned by a ghost company, the real investor is invisible to tenants, local councils, and even to the tax authorities. Rent hikes can be set without any public accountability, maintenance can be ignored, and money can be moved across borders with almost no trace. It's a system that lets the wealthy hide wealth, dodge taxes, and influence the city's development without ever showing their face. If you've ever wondered why a landlord seems to never answer your questions, the answer might be a ghost company sitting behind the lease. Now, let's break down the anatomy of one of these shells. The process starts with incorporation, and today you can set up a limited company in the United Kingdom in less than 24 hours, often for a fee as low as £12. The registrar will ask for a company name, a registered office address, which can be a virtual office in a business center, and details of directors. Here is the clever part. You can appoint a nominee director, a professional who signs the paperwork on your behalf, and you can list a nominee shareholder, a third party who holds the shares in trust. The real beneficial owner never appears on any public document. The company's articles of association can be drafted to give the hidden owner full control while keeping the public footprint minimal. Legal structures that facilitate this secrecy include companies limited by guarantee, which have no share capital, and limited liability partnerships that can be used in similar ways. The use of offshore jurisdictions, such as the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands, adds another layer of opacity. The UK company can be owned by an offshore holding, which in turn is owned by a trust, which is administered by a law firm in a different country. The result is a chain of paper that looks respectable but masks the true source of funds. Let's look at a concrete example. Albeit a simplified one, imagine a limited company called Oak Ridge Holdings Limited that appears on the public register with a virtual office in the City of London and a nominee director named John Smith. Oak Ridge Holdings Limited owns a lease on a luxury development in Mayfair, and the lease is worth £300 million. The rent is paid by a bank account that sits in a bank in Zurich, and the account is controlled by a trust in the Isle of Man. The actual investor, perhaps a billionaire family from the Middle East, never appears on any document that the public can see. All they have is a series of board resolutions that they sign in private and a network of lawyers and accountants who keep the paperwork flowing. What does this mean for ordinary people? For tenants, it can mean sudden rent increases with no room for negotiation because there is no personal landlord to talk to. For local councils, it can mean missing out on valuable tax revenue because the company may claim to be a small entity with negligible turnover even though it controls assets worth billions. For the housing market, it can mean that a significant portion of supply is held by investors who have no intention of selling, driving prices up, and limiting availability for first-time buyers. And for democracy, it means that powerful interests can shape the city's skyline without any public scrutiny. Now that you see the skeleton of the system, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this hidden ownership structure? Does it feel fair that a handful of invisible firms can wield so much influence over our streets? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to read your perspective. And if any part of this story resonated with you, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that you want more deep dive investigations like this. In the next part, we'll dive into how these ghost companies acquire property, the role of real estate agents and banks in facilitating the deals, and the recent crackdown by the UK government that could change the game. Stay tuned, because the rabbit hole goes even deeper than you might expect. The next piece of the puzzle is the way these invisible firms actually get their hands on prime real estate. In most cases, the process looks deceptively ordinary. A developer lists a building, an estate agent advertises it, a buyer steps forward, and a contract is signed. What makes the transaction different is who sits behind the name on the contract. Instead of a named individual or a well-known corporate brand, the buyer's name is often a limited company that was incorporated only a few weeks before the deal closed. The company's registered office is listed as a virtual address in a business center, and the director's details are those of a professional nominee who has signed dozens of similar appointments for other shell entities. Because the corporate bail can be pulled back only under very specific circumstances, the seller, the estate agent, and the bank that finances the purchase are all legally satisfied once they see a valid company number and a director's signature. The real beneficial owner remains hidden behind layers of service providers, lawyers in the city, accountants in offshore jurisdictions, and trustees in tax-friendly islands. In practice, this means that a single billionaire family can own dozens of properties across the capital through a web of separate shells, each appearing on paper as a small, low-turnover business
This is the one.
that pays
The view is
negligible
incredible.
corporation
It looks
tax.
perfect.
The
Shall we
role
proceed?
of estate
Yes.
agents in this ecosystem is more subtle than it might first appear. Many agents specialize in the high-value segment, where foreign investors are most active. They have built relationships with the law firms that set up the shells, and they know exactly which documentation will satisfy a seller solicitor. In some cases, the agents even help to draft the corporate structure, suggesting whether a limited company, a partnership, or a trust would be the most efficient vehicle for a particular acquisition. This isn't necessarily illegal. The market is simply responding to demand, but it does create a feedback loop where the presence of a shell company makes it easier for the next shell to be created. Banks, too, play a crucial part. When a purchase price runs into the tens of millions, the buyer usually needs a mortgage or a bridge loan. The banks conduct due diligence, but their checks are focused on anti-money laundering compliance and on confirming that the corporate entity exists and is not on any sanctions list. Because the beneficial owner's identity is not required under current UK law, the loan can be granted to a company that on the surface shows no operating income. The bank's risk assessment, therefore, hinges on the collateral, the property itself, rather than on the financial health of the hidden owner. In return, the lender receives a first-rank charge over the asset, which can later be enforced if the borrower defaults, but the underlying ownership structure remains opaque. All of these mechanismos combine to create a market where a significant share of London's housing stock is held by entities that are effectively invisible to the public. Analysts estimated that somewhere between a quarter and a third of all residential units in the most expensive boroughs are owned through offshore or shell structures. When demand from overseas investors spikes, for example, after a geopolitical event or a change in foreign tax policy, the price of those units can surge dramatically, pushing up the average cost of rent and purchase for ordinary
See these empty
residents.
houses? They show our community's
What does
real
this
state.
mean for the
Walking here,
city's
you can feel
social
the social
fabric?
fabric unravel.
First, it squeezes the supply of affordable homes. When a property is owned by a shell that has no intention of ever selling, it stays out of the market, limiting the number of units that could be purchased by families looking for a first home. Second, it reduces the tax revenue that councils could collect. A shell can claim that its turnover is negligible, even though it controls assets worth billions, and therefore pays only a minimal amount of business rates. This shortfall forces local authorities to cut services or raise council tax on the remaining residents. Third, it erodes democratic accountability. Policy decisions about zoning, planning, permission, and public infrastructure are made by elected officials. But the people who stand to profit from those decisions can hide behind layers of corporate anonymity, making it impossible for voters to know who is influencing the city's shape. The good news is that the government has started to crack down on this opacity. Over the past year, a series of reforms have been introduced aimed at forcing greater transparency around the ultimate owners of UK property. One key measure is the creation of a public register of beneficial ownership, which will require any company that owns land or a building to disclose the individuals who ultimately control it. In addition, the Treasury has announced tighter anti-money laundering rules for real estate transactions, obliging solicitors and conveyancers to carry out enhanced checks on the source of funds. The aim is to close the loophole that currently lets a shell company purchase a property without ever revealing the person behind it. These reforms, however, are not without challenges. Critics argue that the new register could be circumvented by using trusts or complex corporate chains that still hide the true owner's identity. Others point out that the administrative burden on small businesses could increase, potentially discouraging legitimate investors. Moreover, the enforcement mechanisms are still being refined, and it may take several years before the full impact of the legislation is visible on the ground. Nevertheless, the momentum is clear. Advocacy groups have launched campaigns demanding full disclosure, and several high-profile investigations have already led to the forced sale of properties that were found to be linked to illicit activities. In one recent case, a luxury apartment in a historic district was seized after investigators traced the ownership through 3 layers of offshore companies back to a sanctioned individual. The episode sparked a public outcry and prompted the mayor to call for stricter oversight of foreign investment in housing. So where does this leave the average Londoner? While the structural changes may take time, there are steps you can take right now to protect yourself and to push for greater accountability. If you're a tenant, keep copies of your lease and any correspondence with your landlord, and don't be afraid to ask for the name of the owning company. Under the new rules, the landlord is obliged to provide that information. If you're a buyer, work with a solicitor who is familiar with beneficial ownership disclosures, and consider adding clauses to your purchase agreement that require the seller to reveal any hidden owners. And, perhaps most importantly, stay informed and use your voice. Comment below with your thoughts on how these ghost companies affect your neighborhood. And let me know if there are particular stories you'd like to see investigated further. Your engagement helps shape the narrative and puts pressure on policymakers to keep moving forward.
Hey there! Give this
If
a
you
thumbs
found
up.
this deep dive
Awesome.
eye-opening,
Thanks for the like.
a simple like tells the
great day.
algorithm that you appreciate investigative content. And a subscription ensures you won't miss the next episode, where we explore how similar shell structures operate in other global cities. Thanks for sticking with me through this labyrinth of corporate shadows. Together, we can shine a light on the hidden forces that shape our world.